Hi, I'm Eliot Peper, and welcome to my Inner Circle podcast. I'm really excited today. We have a really special guest for the show. Chris Yeh is the co-author of The Alliance, and I actually have a copy here, so I can show it to you. The Alliance is one of my top picks for business books of this year. It's focused on recruiting, retaining, and keeping high-quality talent really inspired in today's ecosystem for employers and employees. So I think it's a really interesting take on how the dynamics of the workplace are changing and what that means for business owners and for people looking for jobs out there. So I'm really excited to have Chris on the show, not only because of the book, but also because he's a longtime writer, entrepreneur, and angel investor here in Silicon Valley. So I'm excited to tap his brain today. And Chris, maybe we can just start. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. What I like to tell people is I'm a classic Silicon Valley person in the sense that I've done a whole variety of things. I've been an entrepreneur. I started my first company in 1999. I've been an investor since about 2005, 2006. And I've also been a writer. And it actually all began, I studied creative writing when I was an undergraduate at Stanford, but I really got serious about writing probably at the beginning of the 2000s when blogging first started. And I was an early adopter of Blogger when that was the original hosted blogging platform. So really just tried to do a variety of different things.
I also still use Blogger for my blog, so I was happy to see that there's at least one other person out there still on it.
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you two funny stories about that. The first is that at one point, Matt Mullenweg reached out to me saying, "Hey, why are you still using Blogger? Can't we get you onto WordPress?" And actually sent somebody from Automatic to help me get it transitioned over, but I never had time to actually do it. So I'm so lazy, even with direct help from the founder, I can't actually transition.
Nice.
And the second is I actually had an event, one of the huntos that my co-author Ben and I used to run. And at the event, I met one of the engineers at Google on the Blogger team. And when he looked me up after, he said, "Oh my, I can't believe anybody is actually still using that. You're on so many outdated elements of the product. Please upgrade. You're actually slowing down our development."
Oh, that's pretty amazing. So okay, so you started blogging in the early 2000s, right when Blogger took off, and then, as you said, definitely classic Silicon Valley background. So what have you been up to since then?
So probably the big thing, obviously, there is the Alliance, which came out earlier this year. It is all sorts of cool things, like a New York Times bestseller and an Amazon Top 100 Book of the Year, and that's been very exciting. The authors actually created a company called Allied Talent to help corporations and other organizations adopt the ideas in the book, so that's very cool. In addition, as we were discussing before we started, I actually have a day job as the VP of Marketing for PB Works, which is a collaboration software company. We're working on a lot of interesting things there. And I am looking to do my own podcasting in 2015, so I will probably be trying to learn from you as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm looking forward to listening to it. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the Alliance. Of course, your co-authors Ben Casnocha and Reid Hoffman, and you put this all together. So, like, to get us started, how has the employer-employee relationship shifted over the last, say, 50 years, or at least the last few decades, and what does that mean for both jobs and managers out there today?
Yeah, so what we saw is that the relationship has really changed quite a bit, but the way we talk about it and the way we try to communicate about it hasn't, and that's where the big problem comes in. We began in the post-World War II era with this notion of companies being family, and there were these long-term relationships where perhaps your parents or grandparents expected to go work for a single company, or rather your father or grandfather, because it was a different era, expected to go work for a single company his entire career. And he would really defer to the company's needs. He'd be a company man. But it worked because they were in it for the long haul and there was a lot of job security. And in fact, one of the examples we give is that one of the number one concerns of General Electric in the early 1960s was explicitly the job security of its employees. That was one of their top-level corporate goals. Now, that changed. The economy changed. The U.S. Went through a lot of macroeconomic changes from the rise of other economies like Europe and Japan and later other parts of Asia, to the Arab oil shocks, to the impact of technology. And so we ended up where we are today, where really companies don't have that kind of lifetime employment anymore. It's more of a free agency model where people are going from job to job, and people say, well, you know what? Not really. There's no real reason for me to be loyal to a company because the company's not loyal to me. And it's summed up by Jack Welch saying, hey, our employees are on one-day contracts, and if you don't produce, you're fired. And when somebody followed up by saying, but Jack, what about loyalty? He responded in that very Jack Welch way by saying, loyalty, get a dog.
Wow.
So given that backdrop, the question is, it's not actually good for all of us to be free agents and to have zero long-term investment. In fact, if you don't invest in the long term, you end up in a lot of trouble. It's one of the big criticisms of the U.S. economy and our political system is that we never think about the long term. So how do we get to the point where people can feel like they can invest for the long term, be it an employee or an organization, without being a chump?
So, in the interest of not being a chump, what are the elephant traps that managers and employees fall into right now? Now that we live in this new world of essentially free agency employment, and we're not communicating about it accurately, where do we get stuck? What are the biggest mistakes we make?
Well, the biggest mistake is coming from the employer side, and that's basically forcing employees to be dishonest. So all of us have probably gone through job interviews and talked with managers before. And if they ask you something like, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? You probably don't answer, well, actually not at this organization because I feel like in order to grow in my career, I'm going to need to do something else. That's generally considered a career-limiting move. But that's because management has taken the attitude of, hey, you know what? Our employees are here indefinitely, possibly forever, unless we need to fire them to cut costs, and they should be loyal to us, even though we're not loyal to them. And that's a terrible mistake, because once you start forcing your employees to lie to you, they get used to doing that. They feel like they can't be honest, and as a result, they have to protect themselves and behave in ways that are ultimately suboptimal for both sides. It's very much like game theory's tit for tat. And the tit-for-tat experiment, if both sides cooperate with each other, they create more value than if both sides defect. But because of the threat of defection, both sides end up going to a suboptimal equilibrium.
Okay, so taking that game theory analog one step farther, how do you change that from a zero-sum game to a positive-sum game for both parties?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we say it's really critical for management to take the first step. Because the consequences of management taking the first step and the employees defecting are far lower. If you think about it, the big fear that managers sometimes have is, oh, if I speak honestly with my employees about this, I'm giving permission for them to leave. Well, I hate to break it to managers, but they don't have the ability to grant that permission. In fact, most of us have had employees leave us at one point in time or another. And we're actually better off if we know about it in advance than if it comes as a giant surprise at the end. So given the fact that the consequences of defection are so much less for the managers, the best way for change to happen is for individual managers and individual employers to start saying, look, I'm open to understanding that your future may be elsewhere, but let's optimize the time that you have here. And by doing that, then they build the trust to allow employees to say, you know what, I can take a chance too.
So how do you do that? What are the tools that forward-looking managers can experiment with in order to achieve that outcome?
Well, in the book, we talk about a couple of different techniques that are really critical. The first is what we call the tour of duty. And what the tour of duty does is it takes the concept of an alliance, that is, two people working together towards a shared purpose, and makes it practical. So the tour of duty says, as an employee, you have a mission, and that mission constitutes your tour of duty. You're trying to accomplish something, and by accomplishing it, you're going to push your career forward, and you're going to move the business forward. So it becomes an opportunity for everyone to be honest about what they're trying to do, to be very specific and concrete about the benefits for both sides. And by doing that, by having this sort of explicit tour of duty, you're able to make employees' time more productive, and you're also able to retain them for longer because you know when a mission is about to be accomplished. Then you can start the process of defining the next mission rather than just waiting for someone to come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about leaving. So the other key elements are the other two key notions in the book are the notion of network intelligence. And that idea there is that companies really rely, especially in this day and age, on the personal networks of their employees. And network intelligence is all about how do you tap that. And a big part of it is the alliance, because unless your employees believe that you are actually allies, there's not a lot of reason for them to exploit their networks on your behalf. In fact, one of the things we point out is a lot of companies actually ban people from using Facebook at work or ban them from using Twitter or LinkedIn at work. And you're like, okay, so you're going to stop me from doing this. You're going to make it so that I have to do it on my own time and own expense. But then you want me to use it on your behalf. That just doesn't make any sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense itself. I'm sure you've obviously had a lot of experience dealing with this directly, and I'm sure obviously a lot of case studies and interviews and research informed the book. What was the most counterintuitive thing you learned? What surprised you and your co-authors the most as you were putting the book together?
I think the most counterintuitive thing was just how much managers and leaders cling to the notion of companies as family, despite the fact that in many ways they have gone in exactly the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. So we talked to quite a number of CEOs and leaders, and in most cases they said, oh, absolutely, we're like a family here. It's just so ingrained in the way we like to describe our workplace. And when we point out to them, you can't actually fire your children. And I think what's happening here is that we like family as a metaphor for how we treat each other, i.e., we have an attitude of respect, we have an attitude of love, and it's something that persists even if we're no longer under the same roof. And that's all very good, but that's not actually how the job works. That's how the relationship works. And you need to draw a distinction between the nature of the relationship and how it's instantiated in terms of a job description.
What does this mean for employees?
So what it means for employees is they need to be thinking about themselves and their career in terms of how they want to progress throughout their career. And especially early on in their career, employees need to be focused on learning opportunities and experiences they can acquire that are going to position themselves to really advance in their career. And so as a result, it plays in nicely with the alliance. When you're building alliances with your manager, what you're doing is you're being really explicit about the things you're trying to get out of the work experience. And by lining up the things you're trying to get out of the work experience with the things that actually move the needle for the company, both sides actually benefit. In contrast, if you don't have an alliance structure, if you're just sort of working at a company, every time you say, hey, I'd like to get some more training or I'd like to go take this course, it's not viewed as, oh, this person is helping me. It's, oh, this is yet another cost. You have to frame it as a mutually beneficial relationship and to make sure that things like learning experiences and tours of duty are things that are mutually beneficial.
Great. No, that's really helpful. So, maybe we can take a little bit of a different tack here. Can you tell us a little bit what your creative process is like behind the scenes? I know you've written for a long time, and this was this book you obviously co-authored. Was there anything interesting or different about the experience of co-authoring a book rather than writing yourself, or anything that you can sort of peel back the curtain a little bit and let us see what's going on?
Absolutely. And again, I will also put an external reference at this point, which is to say, as a writer, I do listen to writing podcasts as well, such as Writing Excuses, which I think is one of the leaders in the field. And so I do try to learn about how other writers are doing things. in terms of my blogging has really been driven just by impulse. I see something and I think, I have something to say. It's like a compulsion almost. I always tell people, writers write because they have to. There's no grand strategy that we are pursuing where, writing is the key to riches and happiness. It's like, oh God, I have these ideas, I have to get them out there. So my personal writing really takes on the form of just things that catch my attention, ideas I want to express. Writing the book was a little different because we have to be more intentional, more long-term about it. And what I really took away from it was the power, in terms of the co-author relationship, the power of all three of us being able to do different things and contribute in different ways. The classic mistake that a lot of co-authors make when they go to write something is they say, okay, I'll write chapters 1, 3, and 5, you write chapters 2, 4, and 6, and then we'll try to stitch them together at the end. And what you end up with is a Frankenstein monster, and it ends up being frustrating for everyone. So unless you have something that's explicitly a collection of essays, that approach doesn't really work. What we did instead is we were collaborative at every phase. So we actually had, I would argue, 2 or 3 different phases to the writing. So the first phase of the writing was brainstorming. Let's actually talk through the ideas and understand what we think and come to agreements that we're not disagreeing with each other about what actually goes in this, right? We have to be aligned on that. And so that was a process of a variety of brainstorming sessions. We usually take about 2 hours and spend it at Reid's house, and the three of us would just talk about the different ideas and explore them, bring up examples, discuss people we knew and other folks that we'd seen, other books we'd read, and so on and so forth. Once we'd really gotten a good corpus of raw ideas, the next step was really sort of laying out the structure of the book. And there again, we did this collaboratively. You say, well, okay, here are things that we're looking to say. What if we fit these together? And then for each of these, what are the main ideas we want in these different chapters or sections? Then what we did was I did most of the rough drafting because I'm one of the fastest writers alive. So I actually mean that seriously. For a while, I actually had I think I once wrote a white paper in 17 minutes. That was the record.
Wow. So how fast did you write the Alliance? Like the rough?
That's an excellent question. So the Alliance, we pretty much started writing it in August of 2013 and turned in the rough draft in December of 2013.
Wow, 3 months.
So it was a very rapid process considering that this is a full-fledged book. And especially considering that you have three co-authors who each have more than a full-time job. So the final part of it was, we really went over each chapter, sort of paragraph by paragraph, line by line, working together to just polish it up and get it to the state that we really wanted to get it to. And you sort of heard my role. My role is I'm really, again, I write incredibly quickly. I'm also good at what I would describe as translating ideas from the way that a lot of people I know think there's like super intelligent, hyper rational, and then putting it into terms that a more normal person, a more regular person can understand, sort of a translator. I laugh sometimes. I know some of the folks over at the Singularity University, and I'm like, whenever I talk to them, I'm like, let me help you translate, because I can tell it's probably frustrating for you to talk to the regular humans you encounter on a day-to-day basis.
I guess that's the point of Singularity. Those regular humans won't be around much longer.
Well, exactly. Until that time, we got to bridge that.
Right.
Many other things, like Reid is a master of frameworks. So when it comes to fitting everything into a logical structure, he's second to none in sort of being able to be rigorous and thoughtful, and his breadth of experience is incredible there. Ben obviously has all that as well, but he is a passionate editor and really tightly focused, far more disciplined than Reid and I. So when we were having our meetings, it was always Ben who said, hey guys, this is a fun little digression that we're having and we're enjoying ourselves, but we got to get this book out and turn it in on time, so how about you focus on the matter at hand? And he also did most of the editing, cutting it down. There would be parts that he'd cut out and be like, oh my god, that was such a great story. It's like, it doesn't actually fit with what that chapter is about. You just put it in because you thought it was a great story. I'm like, yeah, you're right.
It's sort of cool. I was actually trading emails with Ben last week because I saw that he had in the beginning of the book, he dedicated his part to Brad.
Yes.
Who was also, the guy behind my first novel. So that's it was really interesting. So it's cool that we're actually talking now.
The long arm of Brad Feld stretches quite a ways.
That's right. Well, speaking of books, I really enjoyed reading your blog, and one of the posts that you made recently that sort of stuck out to me was how you sort of talked about the value of literature, and in particular the value of literature to like professionals and entrepreneurs. So, this is something I ran into a lot as an author of fiction, right? So why should busy people read fiction? Why should they read literature?
Well, I think that the amazing thing about fiction is that it gives you the ability to go inside someone else's head and to experience experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have, or to take in experiences incredibly quickly in a way that you can't just with your normal life. So a great example would be, I read The Snowball, which is a biography of Warren Buffett. Actually, that's nonfiction, so let's use a fictional example. In the early 20th century, there was a book written called Jean Christophe. It actually won the author the Nobel Prize. It's very obscure now, but I received the book as a present from a relative. And it's essentially the story of an entire life of a composer, from birth to death. And it's an incredibly long book. It's like War and Peace level long.
Wow.
But I remember after finishing and reading it thinking, this is really amazing. I don't know, are you a Star Trek fan at all?
I'm pretty much indiscriminate in my fandom.
So you may recall in Star Trek The Next Generation, there's actually an episode called Inner Light, in which Captain Picard is exposed to an alien probe which actually causes him to live an entire lifetime in a moment. It's the aliens' way of communicating their lost civilization. And I feel like great fiction often can act like that. It's like an alien probe putting an entire lifetime into your brain at once. And I don't know about you. I've only got this one particular lifetime to live that I can access right now. I haven't got access to past lives or something like that. Maybe I could if I went into some other disciplines. And so fiction occupies that role for me. And so I still find myself drawing upon examples from fiction in as I'm thinking about my own life, or I'm thinking about how to live or how to make decisions. And I just instinctively call upon those examples.
Are there any novels or pieces of literature that you specifically recommend to entrepreneurs?
So a fascinating and very fun read that I think someone would enjoy. So there is a science fiction author named Lois McMaster-Bujold, and she has written a long series of novels, most of whom have either won the Hugo or Nebula Award, covering the adventures of a particular hero. It's a fascinating hero named Miles Naismith Vorkosigan. He lives in the future where humanity has colonized at least some star systems. And it's fascinating because it's the story of this hero who is essentially handicapped, physically challenged due to an attack on his parents when he's young. He's only 4'10". He's physically weak. His bones are brittle and break at a moment's notice. And he lives in a society where people have an incredible fear of mutation. And even though he's not technically a mutant, he's also discriminated against as a result of that as well. So it's a fascinating tale of somebody using sheer audacity and verbal firepower to overcome a universe that is stacked against them. And that is a great example of entrepreneurship, right? You're always outnumbered and always outgunned. And you have to be an underdog and figure out how to wear that and then ultimately use that to be successful.
No, that's really cool. I'll make sure to include that reference in the show notes so that people can link out to it.
Excellent.
So transitioning from books back to entrepreneurship, sort of bringing it full circle, you, in addition to your day job and your writing, you are a mentor and investor in a number of different startups around the Bay Area and beyond. One of the things that you've said, you sort of have written a number of posts on how your opinion differs from Peter Thiel, or at least your strategy, your investment strategy, and your sort of approach to mentorship differs from his approach, which he's been speaking quite a lot about with his new book 0 to 1. one that really picked up for me was how you focus on off-the-radar deals. And in my work as an EIR and then now as an advisor, that's exactly what I do too. So I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that. What does it mean to sort of search out for the weird deals in the Valley, and how does it impact how you work with those companies thereafter?
Absolutely. So I think that ultimately it's a logical reaction. So, and it's in part a logical reaction to not being Peter Thiel. So if you are Peter Thiel and you're a world famous billionaire, and you can get into the best possible deals. But imagine if it's you or I, let's say we were venture investors. Let's say we went to an entrepreneur in a hot deal and said, you know what, don't take Reid Hoffman's money. Don't take Peter Thiel's money. Don't take Mark Andreessen's money. Take my money instead. It's much better. It's insane. I would never do that. I would take the money from Peter or Reid or Mark, right? Because those guys could help me in an immense number of ways and have proven track record and all those things. And while I think it is very nice that people can read my blog and get a sense to know me, I don't count on that allowing me to beat out Greylock or Andreessen Horowitz when it comes to one of these deals.
And I think that's really interesting. So now you've found a deal that is a little bit off the radar, that wouldn't be something that Andreessen would put money into. What do you do once you're invested? How does your role as an investor or board member and advisor differ from how some of the larger or more brand-recognized investors might approach it?
Right. So, and ultimately, let me emphasize that my approach isn't necessarily the ideal approach from a fund return standpoint. It's more the ideal approach from what I enjoy doing. So what I tend to do is work more intensively with the entrepreneur. A lot of it is working with first-time entrepreneurs and helping with what I call the softer side of entrepreneurship. I certainly have a lot of those hard skills, expert in marketing and content marketing and public relations and all that sort of thing, and hopefully product as well. But the other side of it is, I'm like, listen, I'm going to leverage the weaknesses I have and make them into strengths, right? I'm not a world-famous billionaire, so I can understand what you're going through a lot better than somebody who's been a billionaire for the past decade. I understand the struggle, and I understand what it's like to be an underdog. And I get calls from entrepreneurs, they're in a panic, something's gone wrong, something's happened, and they can reach me because I pick up the phone at these crazy hours and at these at different times, and I try to help them. And a lot of what I do is, strictly speaking, more like counseling, more like talking to them about the situation, helping them think through it. I don't have a magic wand that can make problems go away, but what I can do is say, okay, this has happened to other people, and it doesn't have to mean the end of the world. Let's calm down and figure out what are the concrete steps we can take, and maybe people that I can talk to on your behalf in order to take those concrete steps.
So I noticed that you just recently initiated a new experiment called Drivetime Consulting that I thought was pretty cute, and you're doing it very lo-fi at the beginning. So maybe what is that experiment and how's it going so far?
Absolutely. So it's very simple and straightforward. I have a commute every day. I'm driving along 101, and now that the economy is really good, it's actually gotten worse. I did go ahead and buy a plug-in hybrid so I could drive in the carpool lane. I'm one of those people. I should probably be ashamed, but I'm not because it's saving me time. But it still takes some amount of time. And the notion behind Drivetime Consulting is I could be spending that time listening to books on tape, or I could be spending the time listening to the radio. But I don't really like the radio, and I said, you know, I love meeting new people. Why don't I set up a Drivetime consultancy? People can just, and you mentioned lo-fi, they can just PayPal me money. In this case, the simple sum of $100 for a 20-minute one-way conversation, i.e. one-way on my trip, not one-way back and forth. And you know, all they have to do is PayPal me the money, and then I just go ahead and set up a time and make the call happen. I've actually done 2 of these calls since I announced the Drivetime Consulting. They're both very interesting calls. Got a chance to meet some interesting people. They're both entrepreneurial. Part of it is also, I think that unless you have some level of accomplishment, you're not going to spend $100 to talk to some random guy on the internet for 20 minutes. So there may be some self-selection going on, but certainly they're folks I'm like, yeah, these are people I want to meet and talk to under any circumstances, and the fact that they're giving me money, which I can then tuck into the children's college funds, is a great thing.
Nice. No, that'll be fun. So keep me in the loop on how that goes. That's pretty interesting.
Will do.
Okay, so we've touched on a lot here. We've touched on like the themes and the ideas behind the alliance. We've touched on your work as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and then also as a lot on the writing front as well. What's the most important question I'm not asking?
So the most important question, I think, very relevant because of where I am in my life, is how do you find a way to balance work and life? Because, as you mentioned, I'm a really busy person. But the other thing I mentioned is, I've got a family. I've got 2 kids who are now 12 and 10. Obviously, I've got a wife and try to stay married to her and all that. How do I make all this work together? That's probably the key question, because I think people who know me and who encounter me day to day are like, wow, this really seems happy and content with his life. What's the secret?
So what is it? Enlighten us.
So I think that ultimately the secret is being really careful about what I call hard boundaries. So I think that the mistake a lot of people make is they don't set boundaries. Everything sort of spills together. And you read people blogging about this or talking about it on television. Gosh, I'm at the kid's soccer game and I'm on my phone at the same time and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And my response to that is, that's not really helping anyone. That's like the classic, oh, I'm going to multitask by watching television and doing homework at the same time. I'm like, you really don't enjoy either of them. And the other thing I would point out is, I think that there are a lot of activities that we do. If you're spending time with a child or spending quality time with a spouse, you probably don't want to also be reading the internet at the same time. It's just not something that makes sense. And so in my mind, you set hard boundaries. And for me, it's things like, hey, I actually keep reasonable hours at the office. Doesn't mean I won't work outside the office. I do all the time. But I'm going to keep reasonable hours at the office. Or when my daughter says, can you sit with me and watch this program, I may tell her, well, I can't do that right now. Or I may tell her, okay, I'll sit with you for 10 to 15 minutes. But during the time that I'm sitting with her watching Mysteries of the Museum or How It's Made, great programs, by the way, I'm watching it. I don't have a phone out or a tablet out doing something at the same time. And so for me, it's single-tasking aggressively and maintaining those boundaries between, what time is for family and what time is for work.
And sort of being fully present, whatever it is you are doing at that given moment.
Absolutely. The only multitasking I do is drive time consulting while I'm driving.
Okay, fair enough.
If it goes well, maybe I'll expand it. I'll do dishwashing consulting as well. I give them a more discounted rate because the noises are louder.
Miscellaneous consulting. Yeah, it would have to be a shorter call, though. I mean, I guess with the family, depending on how large your family is, I don't know how many dishes there are. That sounds good. Well, Chris, thanks again so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate being able to tap your brain, and I know my readers and listeners do too. So thanks so much for sharing your wisdom. And if people want to follow up, where can they find you online?
So the easiest place for people to find me is they can just find my Twitter account, Chris Yeh, much like your account is at Eliot Peper. It's the beauty of being an early adopter. They can also find my personal website, which I haven't done too much with, but does have links to stuff at chrisyeh.com. And for people who are curious about the Alliance, we actually have a website for the book. It's called theallianceframework.com, and they can look it up and get lots of great information there.
Very cool. All right, perfect. Well, thanks again, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon.
My pleasure, Eliot. I'd love to come on anytime you'll have me.
Great.